When my daughter Aubrey leaned across the dinner table and dropped a crumpled lottery ticket next to my plate, she laughed and said, "If it hits, I expect half, Dad. After all, I paid for it." The room went quiet for a second. Then her husband Gavin chuckled and raised his glass like she'd just delivered a toast. The ticket sat there between my fork and the gravy dish. $2 worth of cardboard mockery. I looked at it, then at her, then forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Very thoughtful," I said. She smiled wide, the kind of smile people wear when they know you can't say what you're really thinking. Aubrey's son Liam barely looked up from his phone. But Gavin? He sat tall and proud in his designer blazer, smirking like the head of the table belonged to him. "That's not even your real gift," Aubrey continued. "We saved the best for last." She turned toward Gavin, who stood and reached beneath his chair, pulling out an elegant gift-wrapped box. The ribbon shimmered under the dining room light, gold foil, crisp edges, and packaging that cost more than most people's monthly groceries. "This," Gavin said, placing the box gently in front of himself, "is for someone who's done more for this family than anyone realizes." He pulled the lid off like he was unveiling a treasure chest. Inside sat 2 first-class cruise tickets nestled in silk. 2 weeks in the Mediterranean, private balcony, 5-star dining, $13,000, every detail taken care of. He handed the tickets to Aubrey, and she passed them across the table to Gavin's father, Walter Morgan Sr., who had just arrived from Tampa 2 days earlier. The old man's hands trembled as he accepted the tickets, but he tried to play it cool. "You didn't have to do this," Walter said, his voice soft but pleased. "But I'm not saying no." My daughter beamed with pride as everyone clapped politely, except me. I sat there with a $2 lottery ticket in front of me, trying to remember the last time someone gave me a real gift without a punchline attached. Aubrey turned toward me again, almost like she'd forgotten I was still sitting there. "We figured you'd appreciate the thrill of maybe winning big," she said with a grin. "Plus, it's more your style. Simple. Exciting. Simple." That was her word for me now. Simple Raymond, her mechanic dad who still lived in the same house he'd bought in the 80s. The guy who used coupons at the grocery store and thought leftovers were a blessing, not an insult. I nodded. "Well, good luck to Mr. Morgan on his cruise," I said, my voice steady but low, "and thanks for the thrill." Denise, my sister, shifted in her seat, clearly uncomfortable. She looked like she wanted to say something, but Liam's fork clattered on his plate, and the moment passed. No one said anything else to me. The attention had already moved on, back to Gavin's success stories, to Walter's charity foundation, to Aubrey gushing about how hard Gavin worked to provide them with the life they now had. I tuned it out and stared at that cheap little ticket. The numbers printed on it seemed blurry. Maybe from the glare, maybe from what I was trying not to feel. That ticket wasn't a gift. It was a message. You are no longer needed. You are no longer important. You're just a piece of our past we keep around for appearances. You built the house, but we've redecorated. I looked up and caught Gavin staring at me with that same smug approval he always wore when he thought he was teaching someone a lesson. "You raised a smart one," he said to me across the table. "Aubrey knows how to show appreciation." I gave him a nod. She's always been generous. And she had been, once. Back when she gave hugs instead of insults dressed as jokes. Back when she wanted to sit in my lap and listen to me read bedtime stories. Back when a $2 gift would have meant something. Now it was just a tool to remind me that I no longer mattered. Dinner wrapped up within the hour. Walter made a speech. Gavin opened a vintage bottle of wine. Aubrey snapped selfies with her son. No one asked me to join a single photo, and then, just like that, they left, one by one, kisses on cheeks, promises to call, and laughter fading into the night as luxury cars rolled down my driveway. I was left standing in my own home with a cold plate of food, an untouched glass of wine, and a lottery ticket I didn't want. I walked to the kitchen and set the ticket on the counter. I stared at it for a long time, just a worthless piece of paper really. But in that moment, it felt heavier than any cruise ticket, heavier than the silence I'd carried for years. It wasn't about the money, it never was. It was about being seen, being remembered, being respected. And apparently, I wasn't. The next morning I sat alone at the dining table staring at the remnants of the night before. A half-empty wine glass, a few crumbs from Liam's untouched bread roll, and in the center of it all, that lottery ticket. I'd moved it around absent-mindedly for an hour, from one corner of the table to another, like it might change its value depending on where it sat. It didn't. It remained what it was. A $2 insult wrapped in the illusion of humor. The sun poured in through the window, warming the surface of the wood table I'd refinished myself 3 summers ago. Aubrey hadn't commented on the table last night, or the house, or anything I'd done. The decorations I'd put up for Father's Day, small, simple things, had gone unnoticed. I'd even made her favorite dessert, peach cobbler. It stayed untouched on the counter until I threw it out this morning, soggy and collapsing in on itself like a metaphor for everything between us. Denise called just after noon. "Raymond, I've been thinking about last night," she said gently. "That was hard to watch." I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temple. "She didn't mean it to be cruel," I said. "She just thinks I'm too used to simple things." Denise didn't reply right away. When she did, her voice was soft. "You're her father. You worked your whole life for her. If she can't see that, it's not because you failed." I didn't respond. The weight in my chest told me everything I needed to know. Somewhere along the way, Aubrey had stopped seeing me as a man. I'd become a prop in her curated life, the modest, old-fashioned father who reminded her of where she came from, not where she was going. Gavin had a lot to do with that. His confidence, his money, his carefully polished public image, all of it worked like a charm on people who valued appearance over substance. And Aubrey had learned to play that game like a professional. I remembered when she used to run down the driveway into my arms, when she clung to me after her first heartbreak, when she cried in my arms the night her mother died. Those moments didn't vanish. They just got buried under layers of status updates, luxury brunches, and boardroom birthday parties. Somewhere in there, my daughter got lost. Later that day, I pulled out an old photo album. The kind with sticky pages and yellowing edges. Aubrey at 4, sitting in my lap while I read to her from a beat-up picture book. Aubrey at 10, proudly holding up the science project we built together, a solar system made from wire hangers and foam balls. Aubrey at 16, smiling next to the beat-up car I'd saved 3 years to buy for her. I stared at those photos like a man trying to decipher a language he used to speak fluently, but had forgotten. I knew who she used to be. The problem was, she didn't. Around dusk, I stepped outside to get some air. The neighborhood was quiet, familiar. I waved at Marcia Kendall watering her garden, and she waved back with a warm smile. "How was your Father's Day?" she asked. I hesitated. "Eventful," I said with a weak laugh. "Got a lottery ticket. Maybe I'll be a millionaire tomorrow." She laughed along, then tilted her head. "Your daughter and her husband? They left pretty quickly last night." I nodded. "They had places to be." She paused, then gave me a look that said more than her words ever could. "Well, we're lucky to have you here, Raymond. Some of us know how much you're worth." It was a kind gesture, but it didn't stick. Not yet. The real sting of Aubrey's insult wasn't the money. It wasn't even the cruise tickets. It was the indifference. The casual way she dismissed everything I'd ever done for her, bundled it up into a single condescending phrase. Simple. That word replayed in my head like a skipping record. Simple Raymond. Simple meals. Simple life. Simple-minded. I walked back inside, the house echoing with a silence I couldn't ignore. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the kitchen counter. I picked up the lottery ticket again, held it in my hand, and turned it over. The corners were soft now, worn from the constant shuffling. I thought about throwing it away. I almost did, but instead I tucked it into the junk drawer and slid it shut. Not because I thought it might win, but because I wasn't ready to let go of the insult yet. Not yet. 2 mornings after the dinner, I stood at my kitchen counter with a fresh cup of black coffee and my laptop open to my online banking dashboard. It was a routine I'd kept for years. Simple, methodical, familiar. Check the bills, review the deposits, and scan for anything unusual. I wasn't expecting anything dramatic, but then I saw it. A charge. Premium travel services. $13,642.74. My eyes narrowed. I assumed it was a mistake. Fraud maybe. I refreshed the page, heart thumping just a little faster. Same charge, same date, just over a week ago. I hadn't booked any travel. I hadn't even left town. My biggest trip lately had been to the hardware store for a new garden hose. and then it clicked. The cruise. The one Gavin opened with ceremony while Aubrey beamed beside him. The same cruise I was expected to admire while holding a $2 joke in my hand. The realization hit like a slap. They used my money to pay for it. I yanked open the drawer by the fridge, rifling through receipts and old warranties until I found the envelope. Inside was a faded, folded document I hadn't thought about in years. A notarized form giving Aubrey limited access to my checking account. I'd set it up after her mother died, back when she was still young, and I was still afraid something might happen to me while she was away at school. It was for emergencies. That was all. A precaution. But like most safety nets, it had quietly turned into something dangerous. I picked up the phone with a hand that didn't feel entirely steady and called her. She answered on the fourth ring, voice bright, distracted. "Hey Dad, everything okay?" I kept my tone level. "Aubrey, I'm looking at a charge on my account. Over $13,000. Premium travel services. Do you know anything about that?" There was a pause, then a soft, dismissive chuckle. "Oh, that, yeah. I used the account to book the cruise for Gavin's dad. I figured it was fine. I mean, it's family money, right?" Her words hit harder than I expected. Not because of what she said, but because of how casually she said it. "You used my account," I said slowly, "without telling me. That money didn't belong to you." "Come on, Dad," she replied, still light. "You weren't doing anything with it. It's been sitting there untouched for years. And Eric's dad has done more for us than anyone. He helped with the down payment on the house, Liam's school, and the country club. This was just a thank you, a meaningful one." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Aubrey, I worked for that money. I missed weekends, holidays, sleep, so you could go to college, so you could have a future. And now you think I wouldn't miss it because I wasn't using it?" She sighed like I was being difficult. "You're overreacting. It's not stealing, it's family. We share things. You always made such a big deal about giving and sacrifice. Isn't this the same thing?" "No," I said firmly. "This wasn't sacrifice. This was theft. You didn't ask. You didn't tell me. You took what wasn't yours and used it to impress someone who's already had more than his share." Her voice flattened. "You're being dramatic. Gavin's dad deserved it. You didn't even notice the money until now. What did you really lose?" "I lost trust," I said. "I lost the illusion that you still respected me." There was another pause, colder this time. "You always make things harder than they need to be." Then the line went dead. I stood there, holding the phone against my ear, long after the call had ended. My kitchen, usually a place of quiet routines and early morning peace, now felt hostile. I looked back at the laptop screen. The charge still sat there like a scar on my account. $13,642.74. A number that would have meant the world to me 10 years ago. Even now, it wasn't just about the money. It was about what it represented. I wasn't a father anymore in her eyes. I was a bank account with a soft voice. That afternoon, Denise came by with a container of stew and a bottle of ginger ale. She took one look at my face and didn't ask what was wrong. Just set the bag on the counter and said, "Tell me." I told her everything. The old bank form, the charge, the conversation. How calmly Aubrey had explained it. Denise just listened, her expression growing darker with every word. "You gave her access to your account when she was in college?" "After her mother passed," I said. "It was just in case. I never thought she'd use it like this." "She didn't use it, Raymond. She abused it." I nodded slowly, the stew untouched beside me. "I'm not angry because of the money. I'm angry because she didn't even think twice." Denise sat beside me and reached across the table, placing a hand on mine. "What are you going to do?" I didn't answer right away. My eyes drifted to the drawer across the kitchen. The one where that crumpled lottery ticket still sat beneath a mess of loose keys and coupons. It was never about the ticket. It was never about the cruise. It was about the message, loud and clear. I didn't matter anymore. Not enough to be asked, not enough to be told, not enough to be respected. "I don't know what I'm going to do," I said, "but I do know this. I'm done pretending this doesn't hurt." It had been 3 days since I found out about the money. 3 days since my daughter defended taking over $13,000 from my bank account with the same tone she'd used to discuss brunch reservations. I'd spent those days in silence, letting the truth sit heavy in the house like dust no one dared to disturb. And just as I was beginning to settle into that quiet, accepted as the new normal, my phone rang. Her name lit up the screen. I stared at it, part of me tempted to let it go to voicemail, to leave it unanswered, like so many other things between us. But I picked up. "Dad, what the hell did you do to my card?" No greeting, no warmth, just sharp indignation. "It got declined at Nordstrom. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was?" I didn't respond right away, just listened to the words dripping with entitlement. She wasn't angry that she'd used my account without permission. She was angry that it no longer worked. "I removed your access," I said quietly. "You used it without asking. That's theft." "You what?" Her voice cracked, louder now. "You can't just do that without telling me. I was standing there with an $800 handbag, Dad. They ran the card 3 times. Everyone was watching. I look like—" She stopped, searching for the worst insult she could find, like someone who can't afford her own life. I let the silence hang for a second. "You were embarrassed," I said. "I understand that, but I think you should be more embarrassed by what you did than by a declined card." "Are you serious right now?" she snapped. "All I did was treat Gavin's father with the respect he deserves, something you've never managed." I stepped away from the window and sat down at the kitchen table, my voice low and steady. "Aubrey, I raised you. I worked 6 days a week, sometimes 7, so you could have what you needed. I gave up everything. I did it gladly. I thought that counted for something." "It did," she shot back. "But Gavin helped me move past all of that. He showed me what real generosity looks like, what success looks like. You're still sitting in that same house, saving pennies and acting like it's noble." "I saved pennies," I replied, "so you could spend dollars, so you could have choices I never had. And now you're calling me cheap for it. You're going to regret this," she said, her voice turning colder. "You think you can embarrass me publicly and not face consequences? You think people won't take my side?" "I'm not trying to hurt you," I said. "I'm protecting myself, something I should have done a long time ago." "You're being selfish," she hissed. "Petty. Cruel. But fine. You want a war, Dad? You've got one. I have friends who matter in this town. People who know how to get the truth out. My truth. Let's see how long your dignity lasts when everyone knows what kind of man you really are." The line went dead. I stared at the phone for a long time before setting it down on the table. My hands didn't shake. My eyes didn't well up. I was past that. The kitchen felt like a museum now. I could still see her, 5 years old, spinning in circles in her birthday dress. I could see her sitting at this very table doing homework while I cooked dinner. I could see the smile she used to wear when she looked at me, like I was the only person in the world she trusted. That smile was gone, replaced by something sharp, weaponized, strategic. She hadn't called to explain herself. She hadn't called to apologize. She called because she'd been inconvenienced, because she thought I'd roll over like always, that I'd be guilted into giving her everything she asked for with a thankless nod in return. But this time, something had changed. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter, I was clear. The daughter I thought I raised, the one who believed in fairness and humility and gratitude, she wasn't on the other end of that call. Someone else was. Someone I didn't recognize anymore. And that realization, that was the part that truly broke me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed with the light off, listening to the creaks of the house, the refrigerator cycling, the faint hum of the street outside. Every sound reminded me of how still my world had become. At some point, maybe around 4 a.m., I got up and put on a pair of old walking shoes. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just needed to move. The morning air was cool, carrying the scent of damp pavement and cut grass. I walked down my driveway, hands in my jacket pockets, and turned onto the same street I'd lived on for 37 years. Every sidewalk crack and leaning mailbox felt like an old friend. But that morning it all felt different. Like I was walking through a memory instead of a neighborhood. I passed the Henderson house, where their grandson was once small enough to ride a tricycle in circles on the driveway. I used to wave at him while washing my car. Now he was off at college. Just beyond that was the corner where I'd taught Aubrey how to ride her bike. She'd cried the first time she fell, and I'd scooped her up, wiped her scraped knee, and told her, "Falling isn't failure, it's just learning." That was back when she still believed me. Back when she still listened. Further down, I passed the old playground where she used to swing so high it made my stomach clench. She'd shout, "Look, Daddy, I'm flying." And I'd cheer and pretend not to worry. She was fearless then, full of wonder. The world hadn't taught her how to pretend yet. That little girl, the one who used to run barefoot across the grass to jump into my arms, where had she gone? My feet carried me past the local market, the same one I used to take her to every Saturday. I'd let her pick one candy bar, and she'd always choose the same one, a peanut butter cup. I thought about the way she used to skip beside me, her small hand curled around two of my fingers. That girl was real. That love was real. So how had it twisted into this? I turned the corner and walked down Maple Avenue, the same route I'd taken the morning of her high school graduation. I remembered the feeling in my chest that day. Pride, joy, a little sadness. I stood in the back of the ceremony while Gavin, just her boyfriend then, sat beside her, already so sure of himself. He wore a suit that probably cost more than my rent. Even back then, there was something in his eyes, a quiet calculation. I should have seen it sooner. The houses here hadn't changed much. Porches sagged a little more. Gardens had grown wild in places, but the spirit was the same. People waved. They nodded as I passed, some offering small smiles. Marcia Kendall was out in her front yard, watering her roses. "You're out early, Raymond," she called. I nodded back. "Couldn't sleep." "Some of the best thinking happens before the sun's up," she said, then turned back to her plants. I kept walking, unsure of what I was trying to find. Maybe I just wanted to remember who I was before this mess. Before betrayal replaced tradition. Before my daughter's voice became something I dreaded. I thought of the garage I used to work at. The one that stayed open late so I could clock extra hours to cover Aubrey's tuition. I thought of the years I skipped vacations, skipped new shoes, and skipped everything for her. And now, in her eyes, I was small. Petty. Cheap. The worst part wasn't that she said it. The worst part was that she believed it. By the time I looped back toward my street, the sky had shifted to pale blue. The sun hadn't quite broken through, but the horizon hinted at light. I stood at the end of my driveway for a long time, just looking at my house. It wasn't big, it wasn't fancy, but every brick meant something. Every corner was built with sweat and late nights and love. This was the house where she took her first steps, the house where I stayed up with her when she had the flu, the house I thought she might one day bring her kids back to for Sunday dinner. But now I knew better. As I walked inside, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. I looked older. Not because of age, but because of loss. Not the loss of money, but of something harder to admit, the loss of what I thought I still had. A connection, a bond, a daughter. I went into the kitchen and poured myself a fresh cup of coffee. As it brewed, I opened the drawer where I'd stashed the lottery ticket, the one she'd flung at me like a joke. I pulled it out and stared at the faded numbers. $2. That was the value she'd placed on me. That was the story she wrote with her actions. I didn't care if it was a winner. That wasn't the point. The point was that it had ended up in the drawer next to coupons and expired batteries, like it belonged there, like I belonged there. Forgotten, unneeded, overlooked. But something had changed on that walk. I was done living in the past. Later that same afternoon, I stood at the kitchen counter, holding the lottery ticket between my fingers. It felt weightless now. Less like a possibility, more like a message. One that had already delivered its punch. I turned it over in my hand again and again, staring at the faded numbers printed on its surface. $2. Bought with my own money. Given with mockery. And thrown, like an afterthought, across the table. There wasn't a single ounce of kindness behind it. No warmth, just control disguised as comedy. I set the ticket down and walked away from it, trying not to think. But it followed me. The image of her laughing. Gavin's smug approval. The weight in my chest hadn't lifted since the call. In fact, it had settled in deeper. I opened the fridge, closed it without grabbing anything. My appetite had vanished 2 days ago. What lingered instead was something more corrosive. Not sadness, not anger, but clarity. Cold, sharp, unrelenting clarity. I walked back to the counter, looked down at the ticket, and let out a dry laugh. For most people, a lottery ticket represented hope, a fantasy. But for me, it was a receipt. A receipt for everything I'd poured into a daughter who now saw me as a burden, a symbol of the life she wanted to forget. It didn't matter if it was a winner or not. She never gave it to me in good faith. She gave it to prove something. To diminish me, subtly, in front of everyone. I picked it up one last time and walked over to the trash can. I didn't hesitate. I opened the lid and dropped it inside, letting it fall on top of yesterday's coffee grounds and the empty tin from the stew Denise brought. It landed with a soft crinkle. That was it. That's all it took to let go. I closed the lid slowly, my hand lingering for a second on the top of the can. There wasn't any satisfaction in it, no sense of power. Just a quiet finality. That ticket didn't belong in a wallet or a drawer. It belonged exactly where I'd put it, buried with the other things that had gone stale. I walked back to the table, sat down, and stared at nothing in particular. The house was quiet again. But now it felt different. Not like silence. More like a reset. Like the storm had passed, and the damage could finally be assessed. I thought about the years I spent collecting spare change in a coffee tin just to save enough for Aubrey's birthday gifts. The hours I traded away under lifted car hoods, dreaming of a day when she'd be secure, successful, loved. I never imagined that the more she rose in the world, the smaller she'd make me feel. I always assumed success would bring gratitude, not arrogance. But then again, maybe that's where I was naive. It wasn't the first time I'd been underestimated. But it was the first time it came from the person I once protected more than myself. And maybe that's what hurt the most. Not the betrayal, but the ease with which she delivered it. As if it was natural, as if love came with an expiration date. Outside, the wind had picked up. The trees swayed gently in the yard. My old truck sat parked in the driveway, dust gathering on the hood. I hadn't driven it in days, hadn't gone anywhere since the dinner. I realized I was tired, not just physically, but soul tired. Tired of being the afterthought. Tired of being the humble man in the background who got remembered when something broke or a bill was due. I glanced back at the trash can. The lottery ticket was gone from view now, buried beneath everything else life had thrown out. Somehow, it looked right there. Honest. A piece of fiction, among other forgotten scraps. That ticket had never been meant to change my life. It was meant to remind me where I stood. And now, it had. 3 nights later, I was sitting in the living room, half watching the television and half lost in thought. The silence had settled into something familiar by then. The kind that doesn't demand anything. I had a cup of lukewarm coffee resting on my knee and the TV remote loose in my hand. I wasn't really paying attention to the screen, just letting it flicker. But then a voice snapped me out of my daze. "Good evening, Ohio. Welcome to tonight's Powerball drawing." My thumb paused mid-press. For a moment I considered changing the channel, but something made me stop. Maybe it was the absurdity of it, watching a lottery drawing after the kind of week I'd had. Or maybe it was something else. Curiosity, irony, fate. I leaned forward slightly, the remote now still in my lap. The announcer continued, cheerful and ceremonious. "Tonight's winning numbers are..." He read them off slowly. 7, 14, 23, 35, 42, Powerball, 18. The moment he said them, something inside me stirred. The numbers felt familiar. Not vaguely familiar. Very familiar. Like I'd seen them recently. Not on a TV screen, but in my own hands. My mind reached for a memory. The ticket, the one I'd thrown in the trash. I blinked and sat up straighter, heart beginning to pound just a little. 7, 14, 23, 35, 42, 18. I whispered them again, committing them to memory. My eyes darted toward the kitchen, toward the trash can. No, it couldn't be. I was imagining it. There was no way, but my body didn't care. I was already on my feet. I crossed the room, rounded the corner into the kitchen, and stared at the stainless steel lid. My hand hovered over it for a moment before I pulled it open. The smell of coffee grounds, banana peels, and yesterday's newspaper greeted me. I didn't hesitate. I dug in. My hands pushed aside wrappers and containers, searching for a flimsy scrap of paper that should have meant nothing. And then I saw it. It was stuck to the inside wall of the can, curled and coffee-stained, clinging to a used napkin. I carefully peeled it free and unfolded it. There it was, creased, damp but readable. My breath caught as my eyes scanned the numbers printed across the top. 7 to 14, 23, 35, 42, PB 18. Exactly what the announcer said. My knees nearly buckled. I grabbed the counter to steady myself and stared at the ticket in disbelief. This was the joke she tossed at me like trash. The afterthought, the insult, the $2 gesture that was supposed to make me feel small. And now it was worth $120 million. I leaned back against the fridge, still holding the ticket like it might vanish. My chest rose and fell slowly, like my lungs were catching up with what my brain already knew. I needed to confirm it. I grabbed my phone, dialed the lottery hotline, and followed the prompts. A robotic voice repeated the winning numbers. If your ticket matches these numbers, you may be entitled to the current jackpot of $120 million. I ended the call and stood there in the kitchen, in the same spot I'd been in when Aubrey called to yell about her card. The same place I'd stood while dropping this ticket into the trash like it was nothing. And now I couldn't take my eyes off it. It wasn't just the money. It was what the moment represented. All the years I'd worked, sacrificed, endured without complaint. All the times I'd been told I wasn't enough, too quiet, too simple, too unwilling to play the game. And now the universe had answered in the most poetic way possible. I stayed up most of the night. I didn't sleep. I didn't try. I sat at the kitchen table with the ticket sealed inside a plastic sleeve and a cup of fresh coffee beside it. I read the numbers a dozen times, then again just to be sure. At some point, I laughed, a soft, tired laugh that echoed around the empty room. In the morning, I got in my truck and drove straight to the Lottery Commission building in Columbus. I didn't call ahead. I didn't need to. I walked through the glass doors with the ticket in my pocket and a calm I hadn't felt in years. The woman at the front desk introduced herself as Janet Chen. She took the ticket with a pair of latex gloves and placed it under a scanner. The machine beeped, then flashed green. "Mr. Ellis," she said, looking up with a polite smile. "You're going to want to sit down." She walked me through the process: verification, paperwork, the 48-hour holding period for large winnings. She said the payout could be arranged as a lump sum or annuity. She explained taxes, publicity, legal protections. I heard her, but the details blurred. My focus stayed on one thing. I had won. Not just money, but something far more important. I had won clarity. The drive home was quiet. The streets looked the same, but I didn't. Something inside me had shifted. And it wasn't just about the number on the check. It was the power of knowing that a joke meant to humiliate me had become the very thing that set me free. I didn't tell anyone about the win right away. Not Denise, not the neighbors, not even the bank. For 48 hours, I kept it to myself. Not out of fear, but out of peace. A kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. I stayed in the house mostly, moving through my days like nothing had changed. Coffee in the morning, a walk down Maple Street, an early dinner. But everything had changed. And I could feel it. Not in my hands, not in my wallet, but in my spine, in my breath. I no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. That was the strange part. You'd think that kind of money would make you giddy, euphoric. But for me, it didn't spark celebration. It brought stillness. I wasn't dreaming of yachts or private jets. I wasn't planning shopping sprees or exotic vacations. I was simply breathing. Like for the first time in decades, my lungs were working at full capacity. There was no panic in the background, no pressure, no invisible weight bearing down on me in the checkout line or when the phone rang. I sat at my kitchen table that first night after the confirmation call, and I looked around. Nothing in that room had changed. The same worn laminate countertops. The same coffee maker that sputtered if I didn't clean it regularly. The same yellowing linoleum floor with the scratch from when Aubrey knocked over a dining chair back in '07. And yet, the room felt different. Not because of the money, but because I now had a choice. I could keep living as the Raymond everyone had come to expect. Or I could live as the man I actually was, quiet, capable, and no longer under anyone's thumb. I pulled the ticket out of its sleeve and set it on the table. The numbers looked ordinary, almost unimpressive, but they weren't. Not to me. Those numbers were a mirror, a quiet, undeniable reminder that dignity doesn't come from approval. It comes from self-respect. I thought about how many times I'd downplayed my own needs, how often I'd apologized for saying no, how long I'd carried guilt for not being richer, cooler, more refined, whatever it was Aubrey thought I lacked. Now, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel anything but clear. I saw it all for what it was. She hadn't just betrayed me. She'd underestimated me, and that was her mistake. All those years she thought I didn't understand power, didn't understand leverage. But the truth is, I just never needed to use it. I wasn't weak, I was reserved. That's the part she never understood. And now she'd taught me that restraint had a limit. I slept better that night than I had in weeks, maybe months. I didn't toss or turn or wake up gasping with a weight on my chest. I slept through the night, and when the morning light crept through the blinds, I got up with purpose, not to rush, not to fix, not to worry, just to begin again. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and stood by the window while it filled the kitchen with that familiar aroma. Outside, the same cars passed, the same birds nested in the oak out front. The world hadn't changed, but I had. And that was enough. Later that day, I sat down and started making a list, not of things to buy, but of things to change. The first item was simple. Revoke Aubrey's access to my financial accounts permanently. I'd already cut her card, but I wanted no backdoors, no lingering permissions, no shadows of her hand on my security. The second item? Consult a lawyer, quietly, privately. I needed a plan, not for revenge, but for protection. Because people like Gavin would come sniffing around the moment they caught wind of this win, and I wasn't about to be blindsided again. The third item on the list? Rebuild. Not my house, not my image, my life. I didn't want to waste this win on flash or noise. I wanted to use it like a tool, with care, with purpose, with boundaries. By the time the afternoon sun dipped below the roofline, I felt something I hadn't felt since I was a much younger man. Certainty. Not excitement, not pride, just the quiet, powerful sense that my life was finally mine again. And this time I wouldn't let anyone steal it from me. The news broke faster than I expected. I thought I'd been careful. No press releases, no flashy purchases, no social media noise, just a quiet trip to the lottery office in Columbus. But in this town, all it takes is one person seeing you in the wrong parking lot, and the whispers begin. By midweek, I was on the front page of the local paper, grainy photo and all, under the headline, "Local Retiree Wins $120 million Jackpot." That's when everything started to shift. At first, it was phone calls from unfamiliar numbers, then voicemails from people I hadn't heard from in years. Old coworkers, neighbors I barely remembered, even distant cousins suddenly remembered how to spell Raymond. Everyone had a story, a favor, a quick question. I didn't answer. I didn't owe them explanations, and I certainly didn't owe them money. Then the text started from Aubrey. The first was light. "Hey Dad, I heard something today. Just checking in. Call me?" I didn't respond. Then, "Is it true? Did you really win the lottery?" Again, I left it unread. That silence, that was intentional. That was my new answer. 2 days later, they showed up at my door. From the living room, I watched Gavin's sleek black sedan roll into my driveway. Aubrey got out first, looking polished and nervous, the kind of nervous that wears lipstick and a strained smile. Gavin followed behind her, sunglasses on, even though the sky was overcast, his usual air of control wafting ahead of him like bad cologne. They didn't knock like family. They knocked like opportunists. I didn't open the door right away. I let them wait. I wanted them to feel the distance. When I finally did open it, I stepped out just enough to block the doorway. I didn't invite them in. "Dad," Aubrey started, her voice syrupy but unsure, "we just wanted to talk." "I'm sure you did," I said. She glanced at Gavin, then back to me. "We heard about the win, and well, I just thought maybe we could talk it through." "That ticket," I said plainly, "was mine. I bought it, with my money, and you gave it to me like I was some kind of joke." Gavin stepped forward, putting on his best reasonable man act. "Raymond, no one's trying to argue. There's just been a bit of confusion. Technically, you're not stepping foot in this house," I interrupted, "and you're not touching a cent." Aubrey's voice cracked. "Dad, I didn't mean it the way it came off. It was just a joke. I thought you'd laugh." "You thought I'd laugh while you humiliated me in front of your in-laws? You handed me a $2 ticket like I was a burden, like that was all I deserved." "I didn't know," she said softly. "I didn't know it would. You knew exactly what you were doing. The only thing you didn't know was that karma had better aim than you." Gavin tried again. "Look, we're not asking for a handout, just fairness." "You had your chance at fairness," I replied. "You cashed it in for control." Aubrey's eyes welled up, but I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I let the truth sit there between us like a wall they couldn't climb. Eventually they turned and walked away, defeated, but still proud enough to pretend otherwise. No apology, no goodbye. Just the soft slam of a car door and the sound of my driveway cracking under overpriced tires. But it didn't stop there. The town took notice. People started whispering. Some said I cheated my daughter. Others claimed the ticket was hers all along. Gavin must have gotten to a few people. His colleagues, his golf buddies, his lawyer friends. They spun the story their way. Suddenly, I was the villain. The bitter father who refused to share his fortune. I heard it at the diner. I saw it on Facebook. Even at the church bake sale, people looked at me like I had horns growing from my forehead. At first, I wanted to scream. I wanted to explain myself, shout the truth from the rooftops. But then I remembered who I was now. I didn't need to prove anything. Not anymore. Let them talk. Let them twist it. The truth didn't need defending. It just needed to stand. And I'd spent enough of my life kneeling to people who didn't deserve my silence. So I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat in the same chair I always had, and watched the world spin without me. They could throw their stones, whisper their lies, and call me whatever they wanted. Because the moment they gave me that ticket, like it was trash, they also gave me permission to walk away. I thought staying silent would protect me. That if I didn't respond, the whispers would die on their own. But small towns feed on silence. They take it as confirmation. My name had become a cautionary tale, and no matter where I went, whether to grab a coffee or pick up groceries, I could feel it in the air. The looks, the pauses in conversation when I walked by, the way someone would suddenly pretend to read a text to avoid meeting my eyes. I wasn't Raymond Ellis anymore. I was that guy who stole from his daughter. At least, that's how they told it. Then one morning, someone knocked on my door. It wasn't Aubrey. It wasn't Gavin. It was someone I didn't expect at all. Walter Morgan Sr., Gavin's father. He stood on my porch with an old brown bag in his hand and a tired look in his eyes. Dressed in a navy windbreaker and scuffed loafers, he looked more like a man bringing condolences than someone here to talk. I opened the door slowly, unsure of what he wanted. He nodded at me, held up the bag and said, "Thought you might still like pastrami from Milner's, still hot." I stepped aside and let him onto the porch. We sat there like two men who'd lived too long to care about pleasantries. We didn't speak for several minutes. We just unwrapped our sandwiches and chewed in peace, the sounds of morning birds and rustling leaves filling the silence. After a while, he finally spoke. "They've got it all wrong, you know." I glanced at him. "Who?" "The town, your daughter, my idiot son, all of them." I didn't say anything. Walter took a long breath, the kind that carries history. "You were humiliated on Father's Day. I saw the whole thing. That cruise package for me? Gavin didn't buy that for me. He bought it to upstage you. That lottery ticket? That wasn't a kind gesture. It was a performance, and you were the punchline." I looked down at my hands. I figured as much. I kept quiet at the time. I shouldn't have. I told myself it was none of my business. But now that they've twisted the truth, now that people are talking like you're some greedy old bastard, I can't stay quiet anymore. He reached into his jacket and handed me an envelope. "That's a copy of the cruise receipt. Came off a joint card, Aubrey's. Gavin didn't even pay for it himself." "And the ticket?" He joked about it the week before. Said it'd be hilarious to hand you a scrap and give me the royal treatment. Like it was a show. I didn't open the envelope. I didn't need to. The heaviness of it, the intention behind it, was enough. Walter's voice didn't shake. He wasn't looking for drama. He was delivering something no one else had offered me since that day. Truth. "I'm not taking sides," he continued, "but I won't let my son's lies smear a man who's only guilty of surviving disrespect with too much grace." He stood slowly, brushing crumbs from his lap. "They'll keep talking," he said, "but they'll start wondering. All it takes is one voice to plant doubt in a good lie. You don't have to shout, Ray. You just have to stand." He turned to leave, then paused at the bottom of the steps. "Some people mistake silence for guilt. But men like us, we know silence is often restraint. And sometimes restraint is the loudest thing in the room." I watched him walk back to his rusted Cadillac and drive off down the road. No handshake, no dramatic farewell, just a quiet act of dignity in a world full of noise. That day didn't clear my name. It didn't erase the gossip or flip the story, but it put a crack in the mask that Gavin had been wearing. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was carrying the weight of the lie alone. I made a fresh cup of coffee that afternoon, sat on the same porch where Walter and I had just shared lunch, and watched the breeze push the truth a little further into the world. The invitation came in a glossy white envelope with golden lettering across the top, honoring the dedication of Gavin and Aubrey Huxley, Community Builders of the Year. There was no apology attached, no handwritten note, just a cold formality sent to the man who had been painted as an afterthought. I set it down on the table, stared at it for a few minutes, and then, without much thought, circled the attending box and dropped it in the mailbox the next morning. I wasn't going for them. I was going for me. The ceremony was held at the town hall. High ceilings, velvet chairs, and enough catered finger food to feed an army. I arrived alone, dressed in my best navy jacket, the one with the silver pin Aubrey gave me back when she still called me Dad, without a sigh behind it. The room was full of people. Bankers, school officials, local business owners. Everyone who had once smiled in my direction now gave tight nods or kept their distance entirely. Still, I walked in with my back straight and my silence louder than any greeting I could have offered. Aubrey was glowing, dressed in a deep burgundy gown that probably cost more than my car. Gavin stood beside her in a suit too sharp for someone who lied so easily. When she spotted me, her smile faltered, but only for a second. Then she leaned in, whispered something to Gavin, and turned her back. They were pretending again. Pretending I wasn't there. Pretending I didn't exist. But this time, they couldn't control the story. When the ceremony started, the mayor stepped up to the podium and gave the usual praise. Selfless dedication, a shining example of family values, pillars of our community. My jaw tightened with every line. Not because I was angry they were being celebrated, but because I knew what it took to build the image they were being rewarded for. Me. My time, my money, my silence. Gavin went first. He gave a speech about leadership, about vision, about hard work. He even threw in a line about overcoming personal attacks with grace, and the room chuckled like they were all in on the same joke. Then Aubrey stepped up, and for a moment I saw a flicker of hesitation. She looked across the crowd and her eyes landed on me. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I wanted her to see me. I wanted her to speak her words while staring into the face of the man she thought was finished. She started slow, thanking friends, mentors, her husband. Then came the shift. "It hasn't always been easy," she said, her voice trembling just enough to seem sincere, "especially when those closest to you turn against you." That was the spark. The moment the match hit the gasoline, I stood up. There was a murmur in the room. Heads turned. Eyes widened. Gavin stepped forward, but I raised a hand, not in warning, just in calm, steady acknowledgement. "I wasn't planning to say anything," I said, my voice carrying across the hall. "But since we're being honored for honesty and community spirit, I thought I'd offer a little of both." You could have heard a pin drop. I'm Raymond Ellis, father to Aubrey, former financier of their lifestyle, and recipient of a lottery ticket last Father's Day, wrapped not in love, but in mockery. Gavin moved quickly then, approaching the mic, hand out like he was about to play diplomat. "Mr. Ellis, this isn't the time." But I didn't stop. "No, Gavin, this is exactly the time. The time to speak what's true. While you accepted applause for being generous, you charged a cruise to your wife's card and called it a gift from your own wallet. While you built your reputation, you built it on a lie. And while you call me bitter, you forget. Bitter men don't win lotteries. They don't sit quietly and watch the world lie about them. They don't wait. They plan." Gasps rippled through the audience. Aubrey looked pale now, her hands clenched around the edge of the podium. I turned to her. "I raised you better than this. I gave you everything. And when I finally said enough, you repaid me with humiliation. But I'm not here to shame you. I'm here to let you know. I remember. Every sacrifice, every silent night, every check signed without a thank you. And now, for the first time, I'm not angry. I'm free." With that, I stepped back, adjusted my jacket, and walked down the center aisle. No one said a word, not even Gavin, whose lips were pressed so tightly together, he looked like he was holding in a scream. I left the ceremony before the applause started again. I didn't need to hear it. I'd already gotten everything I came for. It began with silence. Then came the messages, short, unsure, and spaced days apart. Hey Dad, just checking in. Thinking of you today? Hope you're doing okay? I read every one of them. But I didn't answer. Then came the voicemail, barely 20 seconds of trembling breath, the sound of someone trying not to cry. I let it play out, then deleted it. Not out of cruelty, but because I'd spent too many years listening to words that showed up only when guilt knocked on the door. And then, one evening, there she was. Aubrey. Standing on my porch like a stranger trying to remember the home she once belonged to. No makeup, no heels, no jewelry. Just her, raw and quiet, wearing an old hoodie and holding a thermos and a paper bag like they were peace offerings. I opened the door and stepped aside without a word. She walked in, slow, her eyes scanning the room like it was a museum of things she left behind. She sat on the porch swing without asking, tucking her feet under like she used to as a girl. I brought your favorite, she said softly, lifting the thermos. Cinnamon tea, the kind Mom used to make. I didn't respond. I didn't touch it. I just leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, waiting. Not to punish, but to see who she really was when all the pretending fell away. I'm not here to ask for anything, she said. Not money, not forgiveness. I just wanted to see you, without all the noise. Her voice trembled but held. I know I hurt you. I know I chose wrong. Gavin made everything about appearance, about power, about looking untouchable. I bought into it. I told myself that if we looked perfect, then we were perfect. But I lost sight of what was real. I lost you. She looked down, her fingers fidgeting in her lap the way they used to when she was nervous before school plays. I watched the video from the ceremony, the one where you spoke, and for the first time, I actually looked at your face. You didn't look angry. You didn't look sad. You looked finished, like someone who had let go of the last thread. Her eyes watered, but she didn't cry. That moment haunted me. I kept thinking about that stupid lottery ticket, about how I laughed, about how Gavin smirked, and about how you said nothing. She turned toward me then. Why didn't you fight back that day? I stared out at the horizon. Because that was the moment I realized you didn't see me anymore. I wasn't your father. I was a utility, a placeholder. And a $2 ticket was your way of saying I wasn't even worth wrapping paper. She winced, tears finally slipping down her cheeks. I'm so sorry. I thought I was protecting the family by keeping everything controlled, but I ended up destroying the one thing that mattered most. Her voice dropped to a whisper. You. I finally stepped off the frame and took a slow walk to the swing. I didn't sit close, but I sat. I'm not interested in apologies, I said. Not anymore. What I care about is truth, and whether the person sitting in front of me is willing to live it now. She nodded through her tears. I am. I don't expect you to believe me right away. I don't even know how to earn it back, but I'll try. Every day, if that's what it takes. I looked at her. Not with bitterness, but with the quiet grief of a father who'd buried too many versions of the daughter he once raised. And yet, somewhere in the tone of her voice, in the trembling of her hands, in the courage it took to show up without Gavin by her side, there was a flicker. A spark of the girl who used to hold my hand during thunderstorms. And maybe, just maybe, she was still in there, clawing her way back. I'm not handing out forgiveness like candy, I said. But the door isn't locked. You'll just have to knock, every single time. She nodded again, wiped her eyes, and stood. She didn't ask for a hug. She didn't beg for a second chance. She left the thermos on the porch table, whispered, "Thank you," and walked slowly back to her car. And that's how I knew she meant it. She came alone. No excuses, no performance, no Gavin. Just the daughter I used to know, carrying her shame like a suitcase she finally decided to unpack. And for the first time in years, the house didn't feel quite so empty. I woke up that morning with no plans for war. No thirst for revenge, no hunger to prove a point. For the first time in what felt like years, the weight on my chest had eased. The house didn't echo as much. The silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like permission. Permission to breathe. Permission to be. I stood by the window with my coffee, watching the sun rise slow over the trees, and realized I didn't want more. I wanted less. Less noise. Less chaos. Less pretending to hold things together that had already come undone. The money was still there. All of it, intact, quiet, waiting. But what do you do with $120 million when all you ever wanted was to be remembered with kindness? What do you do with a win that came from the very moment someone tried to make you feel small? I had spent months watching the world unravel around Gavin and Aubrey. Lawsuits, backpedaling, PR disasters, friends dropping like flies, and while they panicked and spun, I sat still. I didn't take interviews, I didn't release statements, I didn't need to. The truth had already done its work. And when the dust settled, all I had left was choice. I could have used the money to humiliate them further, bought their house out from under them, funded exposés, lit a fire so bright no one would forget how they made me feel. But I didn't. Because I remembered what it felt like to be humiliated. And I refused to become what had hurt me. I didn't want revenge, I wanted peace. Not the kind that comes from silence, but the kind that grows in the place where pain used to live. So I chose differently. I started writing again. Stories, poems, half-finished letters to people I'd lost, and versions of myself I'd outgrown. I bought a cabin in the woods, not a mansion, not a fortress. Just a place where I could hear the birds in the morning and sleep without checking over my shoulder. I donated to the local mechanics school where I used to give guest lectures. Set up a scholarship under my wife's name. Helped 3 single dads get back on their feet. Quietly. Without fanfare. Without needing anyone to clap. Aubrey reached out again. This time with nothing attached. No expectations. Just a photo of a sunrise with the words, "Thought of you." I didn't respond, but I smiled. Because that's what healing sounds like. It's not loud. It's steady. Unassuming. True. People in town still ask me about the money. Some joke, some envy, some beg. I tell them the same thing every time. It wasn't the money that changed my life. It was realizing I didn't need to prove anything anymore. That's the trick, isn't it? Most people don't want justice. They want applause. They want to be seen hurting the person who hurt them. But I've been down that road. I know where it ends. It doesn't bring peace. It brings more noise, and I've had enough noise for one lifetime. One afternoon, a boy knocked on my door. Must have been 9, maybe 10. Said he heard I was the man who beat the world. I laughed. He asked if I had a secret. I said, yeah, I stopped trying to win. He tilted his head, confused. But didn't you win the lottery? I smiled. The real win wasn't the ticket. It was realizing I didn't need anyone's permission to be happy. He didn't get it, not fully. But he grinned anyway and ran back to his bike. And I stood there, watching him ride away, knowing that for once the story ended not with a bang, but with stillness. That's how I chose to live from then on. Not in bitterness, not in noise, but in peace. I didn't plan the dinner to be theatrical. I wasn't aiming for revenge or spectacle. But sometimes the universe lines things up so perfectly. All you have to do is show up and let the truth do the rest. It started with a call from Aubrey. "I'd like to have dinner," she said. "All of us. No agendas, just a proper meal. One last time, like it used to be." I could hear the weight in her voice. She'd been trying for months to show she'd changed, to rebuild trust brick by brick. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence speak for me. Then I simply said, "All right, but it's going to be at my house." She agreed without hesitation. Sunday evening arrived, and I set the table myself. No help. No catering. Just the way I used to do when Marie was still here, folding napkins the way she liked, placing candles where the light would catch the good side of people's faces. It wasn't just about food. It was about ritual. About reminding everyone what family used to feel like before it all went rotten. Aubrey arrived first. She brought a pie, apple, like always. She didn't ask if I'd eat it. She just placed it on the counter and offered a soft thank you. Then came Gavin, trailing behind like a man unsure of his footing. He wore a designer shirt but looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. His smile was hollow. His handshake even hollower. I didn't offer warmth, but I didn't turn him away either. I simply nodded and pointed toward the table. We sat in silence at first. Forks scraping plates, glasses being filled. The usual small talk, the weather, the neighbors, the garden. Gavin tried to dominate the conversation, as usual. "We're thinking of starting a non-profit," he said. "Something for underprivileged kids. You know, giving back." I didn't respond. Aubrey gave him a look sharp enough to slice bread. The silence that followed was colder than any winter I'd ever known. Then I stood up, reached into a drawer, and pulled out a simple black folder. I placed it gently on the table between us and sat back down. Gavin stared at it like it might explode. Aubrey looked confused. I let them stew for a moment. I've updated my will, I said calmly. Everything's in there. I thought you deserved to know. Aubrey reached for it, hands trembling slightly. Gavin leaned in, too quickly. Before she could open it, I raised a hand. Wait. They froze. I want to explain it to you instead, in person, so there's no misunderstanding. I took a deep breath. Half of the estate goes to charity, specifically to organizations that help aging men rebuild their lives after being abandoned or forgotten. The kind of men who spent years holding up families only to be left behind. Gavin shifted in his seat. I continued. Another portion will fund local education grants, mechanic schools, trade programs, for people who actually build things with their hands, people who aren't too good to sweat. Aubrey's eyes glossed over. And the rest, I said slowly, will go into a trust for your son, Aubrey, my grandson. It'll be managed until he turns 25. He'll have to earn access to it, through work, discipline, and community service. I looked her dead in the eye. You'll have no control over it, she nodded. Once, no argument, no protest. And as for you, Gavin, I said, turning to him, you will receive something too. He perked up slightly. A flicker of that old smugness. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the same lottery ticket he'd scoffed at nearly a year ago. I'd kept it, preserved in a case, framed with the date and numbers etched into glass. I placed it gently in front of him. This was the moment everything changed, I said. And now it's yours, to remember exactly how foolish pride can be. He didn't touch it. He just stared, the color draining from his face. I stood up. This dinner wasn't about reconciliation. It wasn't about bitterness either. It was about clarity. You needed to see who I am now. Not the man you mocked, not the father you dismissed, but someone who reclaimed his peace and his power. Aubrey stood too. Tears ran down her face, but she didn't wipe them. She just looked at me like someone who had finally seen the full picture for the first time. Gavin remained seated, silent, defeated. As I collected the plates and cleared the table, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was free. They left without fanfare. No hugs, no promises, no grand conclusions. Just two people walking into the night, each carrying the weight of their choices. And I closed the door, lit a candle, sat with my tea and let the silence remind me. This time, I won. So tell me this. What would you have done if your own daughter gave everything to someone else and handed you scraps? Would you have stayed silent, fought back, or walked away with your dignity intact? Because sometimes, the deepest pain doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the people who once called you family. And when that happens, revenge isn't always about getting even. Sometimes it's about choosing peace and letting your silence speak louder than their betrayal ever could. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you of a wound you've hidden or a moment you wish you could rewrite, then you already know. These aren't just stories. They're truths, wrapped in fiction. And they remind us that no matter how cruel life gets, there's always power in standing tall, in walking away, and in letting the truth do its work. Leave a comment below. What would your revenge have looked like? Would you have given them a second chance? Or closed the door for good? And if you felt this, really felt it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Revenge is Mine. Because here we don't just tell stories, we tell justice, raw, emotional, and unforgettable. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the ones they counted out are the ones who rise the highest.